title isn't clickbait. I genuinely do believe that McDonald's can be considered beneficial for a fat loss journey. In actual fact, I think we should even take a step back and start re-evaluating what we mean about supportive of fat loss or unsupportive of fat loss. So in order to explain why exactly I believe that McDonald's might actually be supportive of fat loss, I'm going to firstly explain the concepts and the reasons behind that claim. So when we think of something being supportive of fat loss, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Low in calories, high in nutrients, quite satiating. They're the three main ones. Because obviously when we're trying to lose fat, we're trying to eat less calories than what we're burning off. So that's obviously less calories. That's the first one ticked off. We're obviously trying to feel good whilst doing it. Therefore, high amount of nutrients, which will also mean that there's quite a lot of food. The volume of food is quite high, but the amount of calories within it is quite low, meaning that it's quite calorie sparse and nutrient dense. That's the second one ticked off. And finally, quite satiating, which means that it's quite filling. And that's where protein dense foods come into play because they're obviously really, really filling. And then also the nutrient aspect, which I previously mentioned, that will also help with satiety as well. So if these three things are ticked off, then we usually consider that that food in question is supportive of fat loss. If, however, the food in question is the opposite of these, so it's got quite high calories, no nutrients, and is not really that satiating, then we instantly assume that it's unsupportive of fat loss. That's just looking at the food on its own. That's looking at the food in isolation when eaten on its own. If we look at an apple, yeah, absolutely fantastic, support for fat loss, quite a lot of nutrients, low amount of calories, and relatively satiating. But let's say, for example, we eat 2,000 calories worth of apples. Obviously that's going to be pretty difficult because that's literally, hang on, let me just search this. That's around 40 apples, right? So if you eat 40 apples, that's close to around 2,000 calories, which quite difficult to do, I'm not gonna lie, and you will probably get the shits before you actually eat that. But theoretically, let's say that you actually ate 2,000 calories worth of apples and only burned off 1,800 calories. You wouldn't lose fat, you do the opposite, you gain fat because you're in a caloric surplus. So despite the fact that that food on its own is considered supportive of fat loss, eating a lot of it and the whole day of eating in general has actually resulted in you gaining fat. And also it doesn't matter if you have like a couple of apples and a couple of pieces of lettuce and any other supportive of fat loss food, if you're eating more calories than what you're burning off, you're still going to gain fat. So it doesn't really matter about the food in isolation because foods in isolation do not cause fat gain or fat loss. It's the whole day, the habits and the behaviors of the whole day and the eating of the whole day which causes fat loss and fat gain. Or even more specifically, it's your diet in general which determines fat loss and fat gain, not a specific food in isolation. So now we're on to that point, now we've established that, let's talk a little bit more about what is determined as being a supportive diet. So now we've established that, let's be a little bit more specific and talk a little bit about what makes a fat loss supportive diet. There's two things really. The diet must create a calorie deficit. You must be eating less calories than what you're burning off. If you don't, you won't lose fat. And secondly, you must be able to stick to that diet or adhere to that diet long term. Because if you do not stick to that diet long enough, then it doesn't matter if you've been in a calorie deficit for about a week, you won't notice any progress after that week if you do not stick to it. To put this into perspective, there's around 3,500 calories in 1 pound of body fat, meaning that if you created a 300 calorie deficit, you need to stick to that around 11 to 14 days in order to lose 1 pound body fat. Got it? Good. So must create a calorie deficit. That one's a given. That one needs to be done. That one's crucial. Needs to stick to it. Okay, cool. Let's go into this one a little bit more. So the two main reasons as to why people do not stick to a diet long enough is one, they don't notice results because they don't do it long enough, or they're not actually, doing a diet which actually creates a calorie deficit, or two, they're not enjoying it because it's either restrictive, sacrificial, or makes them feel like shit. Most of the time, that's why people do not stick with diets indefinitely. The calorie target they've been given is way too low, they're restricting all of their favourite foods, they're sacrificing the foods that they actually enjoy eating, and they're subject to chicken, rice and broccoli for 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. However, what if we took one of these diets that create a calorie deficit, 300 calories a day, but then said to the person that was actually trying to eat it, listen, you don't need to actually restrict any of your favourite foods. As long as you're staying within a calorie deficit, it's fine. And then we actually said to them, have a McDonald's once a week, but try and account your calories around it. So the McDonald's are around 700-800 calories, absolutely fine. Okay, cool. Take that off of your weekly energy balance, because her weekly energy balance would have been, let's say, 2,000 calories a day, 2,000 times 7, 14,000 over the course of the week. If we took that 800 calories away from that 14,000, we're left with 13,200, which works out at 1,885 for the remainder of the week if if that person ate the McDonald's, which is still really doable. But the difference between that diet, which the person had the McDonald's on, and the diet which the person didn't eat the McDonald's on and was just eating chicken, rice and broccoli, is the diet with the McDonald's, the diet with the chocolate, the diet that doesn't involve restrictions is more enjoyable. It's less sacrificial, it's less restrictive, meaning that that person would stick to that diet longer than the person that was on chicken, rice and broccoli for 3 meals a day. So even though obviously you've got the foods which are inherently not supportive of fat loss in isolation, you've got your chocolate, you've got your McDonald's, etc., that McDonald's or that chocolate bar or that piece of ice cream is the one thing that's causing the person to stick to the diet when compared to the person that doesn't stick to a diet after eating nothing but chicken, rice and broccoli. And if that McDonald's is the one thing that is allowing that person to stick to the diet, surely that means that McDonald's can be considered supportive of fat loss. In isolation, it's often not regarded as such, but when put into a diet, that's when it starts to become more supportive, because it actually allows you to stick to that diet a little bit longer. And if you actually account your calories around it and ensure that even eating that McDonald's, you're still in the calorie deficit, you will lose fat. That is my TED Talk. What do you think? Do you agree? So I think we should actually change how we look at supportive and unsupportive foods. And instead of saying there's such thing as supportive and unsupportive foods, we should instead rely on calling them supportive and unsupportive diets, because there's no such thing as a food which is bad for fat loss or good for fat loss inherently if it's eaten in isolation. It's only after you implement that within your diet, that's when it becomes a little bit more supportive or unsupportive. If you like this video and you agree with me, give it a like. If you've got any questions or want to discuss this further, please feel free to comment. I can talk for England. And if you want to catch any more free fitness or fat loss based content without any bullshit, as always, make sure that you're either following my Instagram at k.p_health or subscribe to this channel. Peace.